they say quite small positive effect on long-term growth with potential downsides and negatives mixed in there. But there could be a little bit of a positive. However, what's really going on is a massive redistribution from relatively low-income and middle-income Americans to richer Americans. So on growth, a little bit of a positive, maybe. But in terms of redistribution, and certainly if you overlay the tariffs in their current array, as far as we can see, it's a big hit to everyone below, let's say, the median income in the United States.
Now, let me welcome now to the program, as promised, the Nobel laureate in economics, former chief economist at the International Monetary Fund, Simon Johnson. Welcome to you.
Nice to be with you.
It's good to have you here. I'm really interested in your view in a moment on the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. It's one of the defining pieces of politics in this second Trump administration. Before we do that, could you give me a view on the British economy and British politics? Because you'll know the UK government is now enmeshed in something of a crisis over welfare reform and public spending. And the Chancellor is under a lot of pressure. She will not borrow on the scale that some of her Labour colleagues want. She's worried about losing credibility in the markets. Now, your view on that, I mean, how worried, how wary should the Chancellor be about that question, given the state of the British economy at the moment?
Well, I was just in the UK for most of the last 2 weeks and talking with people about the incredible that are now arising for the UK because of US policy. I think the US retreat from multiple tech sectors, the damage that's being done to universities and so on. These are great opportunities for investment and for building up human capital and creating more good jobs across all of the UK. So I think, John, that's what I would focus on, which is the shared growth through investments in technology and building companies. And I think if you can do that in this moment, I understand there's other pressures, sure, but if you can take advantage of all the mistakes that the Trump administration is making, then there's a real strategy to be developed.
Right, so there are positives out there, and some of those positives flow from the turbulence on the other side of the Atlantic. But the Chancellor is pretty well fixed in her view, and it's causing her some problems, certainly political problems with many of her own MPs at Westminster. You'll have seen this, that she will not break the rule that means she cannot borrow except for investment, and she doesn't have a lot of room to do very much without breaking that rule. Now, increases in bond yields come when the markets lose some of their faith in the economic soundness of the government, of the party in power. Now, that can quickly develop into a crisis, can't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone remembers Liz Truss, including Liz Truss, who's writing about this in the US of late. And you have to be careful. I'm sympathetic to the Chancellor. It is very tempting, and it is also the reality in the United States, to borrow without being careful about the future. But only the US can get away with it, and we don't know how long the US can get away with it. Other countries like the UK, given where you're situated vis-a-vis world financial markets and how investors think about their portfolios, you have to be careful because people can turn against you really very quickly. And then, as you say, bond yields go up and it's a whole different ballgame and a very bad ballgame.
Yeah, that we do not have the security of the pound, of sterling being a reserve country currency on anything like the scale of the US dollar. But let's talk about the Big Beautiful Bill. It's not called that now, I think, strictly speaking, but it'll be called that, I think, permanently. There are these diametrically opposing analyses of what it means for the American economy. And that has a lot to do with the ideological leanings of whichever politician is commenting. But is it possible to give an objective analysis of whether this bill, these tax cuts and the changes in welfare will grow the US economy, and at what sort of rate?
So most of the analysis from the right and the left, for example, American Enterprise Institute, which is a right-leaning think tank, but I think generally pretty sensible, they say quite small positive effect on long-term growth with potential downsides and negatives mixed in there. But there could be a little bit of a positive. However, what's really going on is a massive redistribution from relatively low-income and middle-income Americans to richer Americans. So on growth, a little bit of a positive, maybe. But in terms of redistribution, and certainly if you overlay the tariffs in their current array, as far as we can see, it's a big hit to everyone below, let's say, the median income in the United States.
Right. Okay. So look, I mean, the forecast that I've seen on the possible growth in the United States economy flowing from this bill range from about 0.5% to about 1%. The range doesn't go way beyond that, which is, arguably not a transformative over really quite a long period. In which case, the big questions then become political, don't they? If we're talking about a redistribution from the richer to the poorer, and the White House say that's all being overdone by their critics, well then the big questions are political and what sort of blowback there would be on the administration, when it comes to voting time.
The redistribution is from the poorer to the richer. Let's be clear about that. I don't think there's any disagreement on that whatsoever. Yes, look, the blowback is absolutely right, because many people will receive a reduction in their tax bill. But there's also going to be an offsetting cut in the way that certain key medical programs, including Medicaid, which is for lower income Americans, and also health insurance is purchased through exchanges, which receives a government subsidy. So there's about $1 trillion in cuts over 10 years coming to those programs. Those are really big cuts to people who don't have alternatives in terms of how they seek medical assistance. But what's the attribution? Who are they going to blame for that? Are they going to join up the dots? That's the key political question. Because if people can do the net sum, they'll see they're worse off. But if people just look at what happens to their taxes, they may think, oh, we did okay, which unfortunately they didn't.
Right. So a lot of it's going to come down to who is spinning the outcome of all of this when you look at the hard evidence. There are other elements too, aren't there? Cutting government research and development on things like scientific research, that has had a provable dampening effect on the growth in the economy, hasn't it? And a lot of that is down to federal agencies, as well as coming from places like Harvard University, which is under the hammer.
Yeah, there's three things that already happened. One is a cut in the overhead rate based on existing grants, which came out of nowhere, very disruptive. The second is the proposed prospective cuts to the National Institutes of Health, National Science Foundation. Those are going to be quite devastating, frankly. And then there's the attack on Harvard University, Columbia University, and a few others. And that looks like the tip of an iceberg, right? It looks like other universities are going to get caught up in some version of that. All of this is going to have a chilling effect on research. That's going to slow down the development of new ideas. That's going to slow down commercialization. That's going to hurt your long-term growth. Unfortunately, those things don't feature in how the bond market or other people highlight what they highlight into when they look at the budget and look at the overall situation. But those are going to be first-order negative effects on the American economy.
How long before the evidence or the impact of all of this becomes just plainly apparent? Because the White House can say, look, this is going to grow the economy, we're all going to benefit, everyone will feel better off. But it won't be surely very long before people can judge that for themselves on hard evidence of their own experience.
Well, that of course, is the problem with macroeconomics, John. A lot of other things happen and will continue to happen. So in terms of attribution, you and I can say, well, look, we remember what happened on this particular date in July, and we can model or measure how that spread through the economy. But there'll be one or two or three other major macroeconomic disturbances before the midterms and certainly before the next presidential election. So what will be the attribution? What will people see as causing the disappointing effects on their own livelihoods, on their own families? That's the political question. And that, I think, is where the political debate is and should be in the United States.
All right, good to get your thoughts. Thank you, Simon. Simon Johnson there, Nobel Prize-winning economist.